love the engagement, love the commentary, love the questions, love the arguing. So, we all learn through all of that. So please engage. And yes, I see the thumbs up there. Someone enjoyed that as well. Cool, man. And yeah, looking forward to the session, Howard. Thank you so much again for all the preparation.
Excellent. All right, fantastic. So what I've decided to do in the next couple of months is really to take a few of the knowledge areas within the DMBOK and focus on them for 1 month, and also focusing on them from different personas. And I'm sure you've heard us repeat this. So this is metadata for data managers. So when we ask you questions and challenges, what we're trying to talk to you about is what does good management of a metadata practice look like? Okay, so as I'm sure you're aware of, the managers don't always need to know what the technical activities and processes are and what the complications are of metadata, but they do need to know how to manage and what to focus on. So that's the context for today, and then we'll progress as we normally do. We'll be doing metadata for data citizens next week. The week after is for professionals. Then we'll get into all the details of how to do a meta model and things like that. And the last time is for executives, and then it will almost be, how do we sell this to execs? How do we communicate with executives about the importance of metadata? So on each one of them, we take quite a different perspective. The DMBOK tends to focus just on the professional, but we're trying to lift it and explain how these things will work. All right, so the first thing I wanted to do with you guys is to say, if you were to run and if you were in charge of metadata management, where would you be focusing on? This is a ranking question, so you'll almost need to rank the different areas. So I'm quite interested to find out how you would rank these different focus areas. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I know Debbie always enjoys Menti. She always wants to finish it first.
It's the best. It's like playing a game.
Ah. Got 4 answers. A few more. Let's get 2 more, and then we so we don't need to hang around for too long. Okay. Fantastic. So I'm quite interested in knowing from those who marked other, what is it that I've missed? Have I missed an area? Is there something that you feel managers should be focusing on that I haven't put down? Can anyone help me there? Unless Paul wants to argue.
Yeah, sorry, Howard. I was maybe it was a dumb entry because I just selected it because it was there, but as the last.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know that you had done it. I just guessed. Sorry.
No, I heard you. I heard the beaming through the.
I chose other for the angle of retrieval. Again, it's Rita from the semi-structured, unstructured content side.
Right.
So
now,
retrieval is important for me in the sense of if your metadata doesn't work, then your filtering options and that type of thing doesn't work. Yeah.
Okay, so it's sort of, so the way I sort of term that is almost like searchability.
Findability. Yeah.
Right. To be able to understand. Yeah, and I suppose and just my reasoning there would almost be, it would be one of the essential concepts within the practice definition, and the professionals would need to make sure that I can achieve that. But I get your point. I understand what you're saying. Liana?
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Sorry, I'm not sure how to say your name.
It's Lena.
Lena. Sorry, Lena. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm randomly joining from Europe.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's a fun conversation. Yeah, I just raised 2 points in the other, which is
Yes.
the actual requirements. So what are we trying to do with metadata? Who are we
Ah,
serving?
okay. The
And
metadata requirements in terms, and almost in terms of how would we deliver value in a way. But yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I
yeah,
get
it might not be direct value that you're getting
Yeah.
out of it.
Yeah.
And that's the difficult part for management to understand, that this might be an indirect value add by efficiency. So
Right.
that's
Okay.
also a requirement. And the other one is regulations, which
Yeah.
at least in the
Yeah.
finance industry is the massive driver.
Yeah, certainly. I think with BTBS 239 and not having
Yeah, the likes, yeah.
PowerPoint programming, and now you've got to actually show the metadata in terms of the flow and the data lineage in terms of GDPR and privacy. Zelda, something from your side?
No, I was just wondering under which of these categories retention would fall, because I guess metadata is very valuable in determining your
Right.
retention policies.
Okay, so this is, and I'm glad we had this. So what I'm trying to focus on, this is for a person who's going to manage a set of basically a set of professionals, and they're more focused on establishing how we manage how we do metadata management, and the roles and the decisions and the value that we provide to the organization. So the actual technical or conceptual thing on how do we do a distributed metadata system or a whatever it is, that is certainly important as part of metadata, but you'll typically not find the manager responsible for focusing on those areas.
Makes sense. No,
Okay.
makes sense.
I mean, they do have to. I mean, I agree that they do have to be. If there's a compliance one is a good example of that. If there's certain regulatory stuff, they need to make sure that we're achieving that level of compliance. But exactly how it's done and things like that, they're not really. They're not. I mean, they should have an understanding, but they're not. That's not their focus area. Okay, great. So thanks very much. Now, the one, I suppose the area that I was quite interested there is and maybe someone can help me, that I know I focus quite a lot on decisions. Someone provide an example of the type of metadata management or management of metadata decisions that may be important. So there were quite a few people voted on decisions. What was your view on decisions with respect to data managers that are responsible for metadata?
Howard, I'll chip in again. My previous experience was that we needed to document why we took certain decisions, because
Right.
some issues are perennial and they come around. And a simple example that I had is a company that I worked for had a region called Asia Pacific,
Right.
but they grouped New Zealand into Asia Pacific, and they had Australia as a region on its own.
Right. Right.
And people don't know that, and it was useful to then just to be able to refer to the reason for the decision, as opposed to, discuss it again and again because people want to fix it. Well, it's actually a decision that's been made at another level.
Okay. Okay. So that's almost it somehow relates to the operating model in terms of where different things are happening. And you're right, and that's a good challenge for data managers is making sure that this practice works well within the business operating model.
Indeed.
Liana?
Yeah, my point of view there was more in terms of scope and priorities.
Right.
They basically drive the rest of the decisions then on how
Okay.
the practice works and what the cost is, etc.
Okay, great. So that's I'm glad we sort of have an understanding there. I thought just by using the word decisions that I may be confusing some people, but it was good to see that lots of people thought they were important. All right, so let's go into the actual the presentation. So today, as we said, it's Shooks. This is out of date because I think we missed last week, so sorry about that. We're dealing metadata for managers, and we're trying to understand data using these 5 W's and 2 H's. So that's important to it. So just before I get into all of the metadata for managers, I just wanted to review the important elements of that the DMBOK refers to in terms of metadata management. This is a mind map that we have that we use to do training. Veronica does a lot of it when we train on the fundamentals, and I always use it to structure. If I'm defining a practice, I make sure that all of these areas have been catered for. And if we look at the one aspect of metadata management, we talk about essential concepts. So what are the types of metadata? And sorry, you can't see it on the screen. I battle to fit it in. It's business, technical, and operational metadata. Standards for metadata. That's the ISO 11179, which is naming. And then we've got metadata for unstructured data. That's what a few of you were talking about, is the descriptive, structural, administrative, bibliographic, record keeping, and preservation metadata. Anyone work with preservation metadata? I found that to be extremely interesting. Somewhere along the line, I realized that I had no idea what it was about. And then lately, I've just seen it cropping up all over the place. Anyone know what preservation metadata is? So it's not when the data dies, or when I need to. It's close, but not exactly that. Any ideas? Anyone who can offer a suggestion on that? Okay, great. So preservation metadata is a lot of the times it's based on legal relationships and legal requirements, and it's related to the task of e-discovery. And what they would do is to say, whenever you create documents or assets or whatever it is, and these are the assets that we may be interested in, and we could have things like processing agreements on data privacy, or when you work with our customer data, we want you to tag the data appropriately so that if we find that you've been doing something wrong or whatever it is, and we need to come and do a electronic search or a search of information, we can use a metadata scanning process, and we can pick up all of these documents. And so it was part of maintaining a document that were important to one side of the legal contract or relationship, and they could use it for electronic discovery, and they didn't need to go and look at all your file, all your folders and your containers. And it's really coming about now with COVID, where we can no longer go to physical documents, and now things have to be accessible digitally, and we can search on that. So nice change that's coming about. And then we've got sources of metadata, and that's probably one of those things, is that metadata we get everywhere, anywhere, but these are the typical examples of metadata that we should be familiar with. Then we have a metadata architecture, when we've got this centralized, distributed, hybrid, and bidirectional. Now, we just need to know that those, from a management point of view, that these are some of the areas that we need to look at. With respect to the activities, in terms of the DMBOK or the context diagram, it is about defining the strategy, understanding the metadata requirements, defining a metadata architecture when we know about the requirements, creating a meta model. Any of you, hands up in terms of those that have had to create a meta model? So this is not just a data model, this is a model about a model. And then we've got applying metadata standards, managing metadata standards, and creating and maintaining metadata. Okay. Those are the sort of activities in the DMBOK. From a governance point of view, this is what we need to ensure that we're governing with metadata, is the process controls of creating the metadata, documentation or master catalog. That's also as important of it's almost like a data catalog, but it's a metadata catalog. Standards, guidelines, and metrics. So how will we measure that? That's the sort of things that the management people also need to take care of. Can they answer these things? Implementation. When we go into implementation, do we have a risk and readiness assessment? And what about organizational and cultural change? And it was interesting. I've just been doing a course on data governance. And when I teach data governance, the first day is rather intense, because what we do is to say, it's great. You can, you've got chapter 2 and chapter 3. Well, it's actually chapter 3 is the main chapter on data governance within the DMBOK, but then you've got all of the other chapters like data handling ethics, data management maturity assessment. You've got organizational roles and expectations. And then we've got organizational change management. So there's 5 governance-related chapters within the DMBOK. That's why we've got 18 chapters and only 11 knowledge areas. And then within every single knowledge area, there's a component of governance. And what not a lot of people are aware of, there's a component of change. Okay, so it's the organizational and cultural change. So what is it that we need to do to change? And those were, and I was hoping that 1 or 2 of you may have picked up that in terms of other, how do we change? How do we make people aware? How do we do the knowledge management side of metadata? I think it's a very, one of the areas that are becoming extremely popular and extremely important to deal with a lot of the issues. It's metadata is fantastic. This idea of semantic models or meaning and taxonomies and ontologies, all these type of things are phenomenal. How the growth of metadata, knowledge management, impressive. And then what technology, what techniques, data lineage, impact analysis, and metadata for big data. So all these automated, and we'll probably have Guillermo that has spoken on the big data one. He offered to talk on the professional side in terms of defining classifiers that will allow us to classify data in lakes, understand and try to understand meaning about what's in the data from a AI point of view. So he's done some fantastic work there. So we look forward to interacting with him on that one. Everyone comfortable with sort of what the DMBOK deals with? I'm sure you guys, most of you have had exposure to that. Okay. If you have a question, please put up your hand and we'll go through that. Okay. So I just wanted to break this down a little bit more, and we can operate in those different areas. I think this is quite important and leads to lots of confusions, but also leads to lots of complications from a management point of view. So I don't know how many of you have ever tried to put a RACI model together for metadata, and then you just and you think, oh, okay, it's just a series of processes and people and roles, and then I'll just allocate roles to people. And yes, at a high level it is, but at a more detailed level, you've got there's almost a page and a half of the different types of metadata, business metadata, technical and operational, and you'll find that you've got completely different RACI definitions for these different types of metadata. Okay, so I'll show you an example of a RACI that we put together, and I think we had in the region of 50 different people that were involved in that RACI diagram. So what we thought was going to take us a week or 2, I think ended up in a month and a half or 2 months to actually build that RACI diagram out. Okay, so here is the DMBOK, as you know, the context diagram. These are the inputs, business requirements, as Liana actually pointed out. That's very metadata issues. What are the challenges? Notice the business, technical, and process. There's part of that is the operational side. We've got data architecture as well. How do we build this architecture? Operational metadata, data governance metadata. So there's just, I mean, the other day someone said that data is, or metadata is data. It's almost the same and as complex as normal data, maybe more. Okay, these are the type of deliverables that we're focusing on. But again, from a management point of view, we just need to know that we have the roles to be able to deliver, and we understand the processes that we need to work on. I like this view. I don't know, any of you, have you dealt or have you read the Navigating the Labyrinth by Laura Sebastian Coleman? She builds this sort of simplification of the DMBOK to communicate with execs, and she has this life cycle almost by all of these different areas. I wanted to just highlight here that we've got this sort of the responsibility for the manager that they need to focus on is metadata control and management. All the searching, searchability, the formats, the moving, the delivery, the integration, these are the things that the more technical people will deal with. And management needs to focus on this area. But if I then take our life cycle diagram, I can sort of start splitting up the business metadata is that tends to be predominantly on the plan and design phase of data lifecycle. That's where it tends to get generated. Our technical data and store, that's a lot of the times where we're getting into the technical data, and then we got the operational data. All right, so just for those that are not clear, when they build a meta model, this is a sort of high level meta model. We've got logical data, where if I was doing a very high level meta model of a data model, we'd have a data model that's an entities, attributes, relationships. And then when we go to physical data, we talk about a data store, whether it's a database, whether it's an Excel, whether it's whatever it may be. We've got then files and tables, fields and columns. So that's a high level meta model and a simplistic meta model at that. We can have everything from how would we store the results of data quality, just about every, well, I don't know of one knowledge area that doesn't generate metadata. And then we've got technical metadata, which is almost a representation of your data dictionary, which are code sets, code values, codified domains, a business value, not so much the value we were talking about, but a business value in terms of the possible values that it can relate to in the glossary. And then you got systems and applications that work together. Okay, so again, just an example of techniques, your data lineage and impact assessment. So we could certainly say if we're going to change this aspect over here, then all our downstream are affected by it. This is how the data flows. Or if we change order history, then we could have everybody affected. If we change this guy, then only that total back order would be affected, not everybody else. So it's all your predecessors that, all your subsequent people down the stream that are affected. Interesting term there called stitching, a process whereby metadata management system augments implemented with the as designed. So how do we relate these two together? Okay. So that was just the sort of background for our metadata managers. And if we now to go into this area. Okay, so what I've really enjoyed doing when I sit from a management point of view in terms of how to build an operating model, how to do a practice definition, I really like to have these dimensions of my thinking so that I know that I've dealt with all the different aspects. And if I can, it was interesting for me, the first time I used it was when I started using a bus matrix for data warehouse design. I could then go and I almost color-coded, when on the bus matrix, I color-coded all my facts, and then I color-coded my dimensions. Okay, so we had, do I have a dimension of people? An example of that would be customers, things, maybe product, a calendar, date and time, locations, we sort of know that. The why dimension, which is not always obvious, and we got the how dimension, which tends to be at a almost at a fact level, and then we've got the quantities that we measure. And I really like this, and I could do lots of data warehouse model reviews, and I could, by just doing a coloring, I could say, oh, but you know, we're missing something, we're missing these different elements. And that was a very helpful technique, and that was where I started to learn this benefit of using it. And it was just the other day when a guy by the name of Lawrence Core presented his, I don't know if any of you are aware of that, it's called the Beam canvas that he's put together. Anybody had any exposure to this way of building an agile data warehouse? Okay. Connie, I think Connie was in part of the same presentation. And what he does do is he builds a script, and then when they do the agile design, they have sticky papers and they use the business canvas thing, and then they come along and they talk about stories of a data warehouse, and they put the sticky labels above on each one of these areas. And I like that way of interacting. I also use an approach called Participlan, where we get people to become engaging into the discussion, and that's really helpful for things like online sessions. Otherwise, you really battle to get the level of engagement going. And the Miro board, Lawrence Core uses Miro board, and there's a fantastic development, and people can see how this comes together. Now, I like to do the same thing when we do practice definitions across all of the different knowledge areas. And this is sort of how it develops for me. Okay, and this is what I've done in terms of metadata management. So when I define a practice for metadata management, I look at decision making. So I can then break the decision making into all of these different areas, and you can see that it gets quite detailed. So why do we need to manage metadata decisions? What's the reason for understanding and cataloging them all? What metadata decisions need to be made for a metadata practice? Where are the decisions made? Okay, so in what locations, in what organizational levels are we making these decisions? Who's making the decisions? And a lot of the times you'll do that almost at a persona level. You wouldn't do that by individual, but you'd almost say head of department or organizational unit or EIM, central EIM department. They make the type of decisions, and then when are these decisions made as per the life cycle of data? Okay, and then how are we going to make these decisions? Do we need to make them in a team? Do we need to have sign off of these decisions? What's the process? And then how many decisions that we need to be made are met? We've got roles and responsibilities, and I do exactly the same thing. And I'm sure you guys can read it, so I don't need to read through all of these. And then I even had the discussion today. Someone asked me why in the DMBOK do they call it roles and expectations and not roles and responsibilities? Is there anyone that would like to offer a suggestion as to why did people call it an expectation?
This is just a guess, a fire guess, but maybe because even if it's outside of your responsibility, it's still expected for the job to be done. So you got to pull in every resource you can to get the expectation filled.
Yeah, there's that side of it, and what I noticed in the last couple of days when I was talking through the operating model, and I had to break, and let's talk about a federated operating model, which means that we've got a distributed data management function. They've been broken up into the business units, and then you start trying to put certain controls and ways of work down at a centralized level. That definition almost becomes an expectation on what people need to do. And one of the challenges that you face when you've got a highly federated or distributed structure is that the ability to make decisions and the decision mandates and there's almost ability to operate independently. When you put down a practice definition, sometimes that's better expressed as a practice expectation. Whether I do it or not, or whether I perform them or not, is a different reason or a different outcome. And I need to get more and more involved in change management to ensure that we get the buy-in and we get the awareness and we get the reason for it. If I'm centralized, then of course there's almost a dictation that this is going to happen and this is the way you're going to do it. So sometimes what you describe as a responsibility in your practices can really be an expectation, like, please, can you do it? And you can't always dictate that, because they can choose how far they take it and what they're actually doing. Then we have costs. Of course, from a management point of view, why are we spending the money? Do we have a cost-benefit analysis? What the costs will be to deliver data metadata management? Where will the costs be incurred, and who will pay the costs? Okay, so that becomes quite a detailed analysis when you break, and the operating model gets more and more complicated. And as you federate it, you now have to go and justify to the business departments that either they must pay for it, or if you want metadata management, you've got to handle it. Especially when it comes to technology. If we have a centralized technology or if you have a distributed technology. Then we get involved with measurement. Why do we need to measure? What is the current one metric that matters? Where are we measuring? And again, we go through the same thing. And then how many or how much measurement is required to deliver a successful metadata management practice? And then change management. We can't do without it. Why do we require it? The readiness is certainly, for me, the biggest justification of why we require change management. Can we make an assessment or a readiness validation on the fact that business will be able to, are ready for the metadata practice definition that you have defined? There's awareness and knowledge management in terms of change, and we can see the different breakdowns. Okay. Any comments on that? Are there any people thinking, oh, this is crazy, it's not really helpful to me, or it's too complicated?
Howard?
Yes.
Danelle? Yes.
Hi,
Danelle.
Danelle.
How are you?
Yeah, fantastic. And you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, I always struggle with the measurement part. I mean, especially when it comes to how do we really measure the value of this? I mean, where do you think we should start with it? Right at the beginning or once we are done?
I like it. That's a great question. The first step I like to always recommend to people when they get involved in measurement is try to separate, when you define metrics, try to separate between leading indicators and lagging indicators. So leading indicators are a lot of the times the things that you can control, and lagging indicators tend to happen, they're downstream and they're not always in your control. So things can come about and they don't always, the outcome's not there. And so you're a bit challenged. Now, business value is one of those that it's a good lagging indicator. And your leading indicators, for example, how many data lineages have I developed? How many data flows have I defined? How many business glossaries? How many data models? These are things that are leading indicators, and within your dashboard, you can see the movement of that pretty quickly. But has it translated into business value? And the answer is, well, we don't know. And we don't have a direct correlation or a causation between a data model and business value. So we've got to try and find measurements where there's a cause and effect that we can hang on to. And one of the ways I do it is by using the SWOT analysis as part of the data strategy, where we discuss friction, the friction that business has with data. And I'll give you an example of one of my customers. They, as part of the data strategy, they made the comment that it takes a very specialized and highly educated person. It takes them 3 months to understand a data set that's shared between departments. And so this was not an arbitrary person. This was a highly skilled SME within the departments. And when they were given data from another department, they said it could take us up to 3 months to understand that data. Why did it take them 3 months? Well, there were no data models, there were no business glossaries. It was almost just an Excel spreadsheet, and they said, here's the data. Now, and it's quick to load data up into Power BI or something like that, but what did the actual columns mean? What is the misinterpretation? How did we use them in the calculations, in the graphing, what the purpose was? That was absent from that data sharing at that point in time. So that became a SWOT, all right? And then it was all about making data understandable. And then when we brought in the data model for that, we could then have an impact on, well, how long was it taking this person to understand the data? Did that answer your question?
Yes and yes, yeah, it did answer my question, because I think we get into this state where we get so excited or overwhelmed with everything that we're doing that
Yeah.
we actually forget to reflect or look back. And where once you have to produce that evidence, it becomes difficult for you to actually go back and say, I did how many of these things. And so
Right.
I just wanted a kind of a method of how you can actually keep this in a way that is
Yeah.
going to be understandable to whoever the execs are that you're trying to show what
Right.
value is brought in.
So we really work hard on our data strategy by department, by business capability. We ask them, what problems are you having with data? And we go to another level where we actually break down the types of data. So, for example, if you have a business capability that must be manage vendor relationships, the subject area would be vendor. The types of data would be the vendor master data, the vendor metadata, the vendor preservation data. Those are all the different types of data. And then we ask them, what are your challenges? What weaknesses do you have with respect to this data? What opportunities do you see in being able to get vendor data from some other department that gives you more details? And then you say, okay, now that I understand them, if I do these activities from a data management point of view, I can deliver business value. And so part of our project management will constantly be, I'm doing this for this to address this SWOT, and I'm establishing this practice. Zelda?
No, I was just now based on what you were saying about the people saying that if they get a data set from one of the other board SMEs that it could take them up to 3 months. But I think other reality is when there are large projects and people want to onboard, let's say, contractors or people, like another measurement can be is like how quickly can people start getting to hit the ground running.
Right.
I think that's where you might have people that came from a completely, maybe not a different industry, but other company.
Right. Yeah, so that's almost that knowledge management side of it. And the quicker, a good metric for knowledge management is how long does it take a person to understand what they need to do to deliver a good quality deliverable. So, and then what we almost do is a knowledge management metric would be to say, how well are your processes documented? How well are the techniques defined? Do you have good collaboration on performing those techniques so that when new people come into the organization, and even contractors or vendors, that come and provide a service that you can say this is the way we operate. And without that, it's hard to get them going as quickly as possible and not have mistakes at the end of the day to say, oh, you know what, you expected the Chen notation when you delivered a data model, but I like this other notation. So, and those tend to be unwritten. So you don't really, when you onboard a contractor, you don't say, well, you're not that specific to say these are my requirements. But okay. And that's certainly something that we have with change management. I don't know if you've seen it. They do this thing called a day in your life, and I'll show you an example of a day in what's for your job. Describe a day in my life, and then these are helpful things, and then we can see whether people can operate at that level. Okay. All right, so this is what I did using that beam approach. I actually just brought these things together. I now was, so in this scenario, I worked at a concept level and I broke down by concept, by decision making. I go why, what, where. Now, what I like to do is break it, represent it the other way, where I put all the whats together, the whys together. Sorry. That gets to that, and then this helps me explain and understand the different levels of what I need to focus on. So why am I doing something? Okay, then the what's, and I actually find it easier to work at this level and then bring it down and do all the whats and do all the whens, but that's me, you know. So where are we going to do it? So where do we need to establish the practice? Where are the metadata roles? Where are the decisions made? And I'll work through that area. And I certainly like the interaction when you're dealing with 4 or 5 people, that you can set the context of the discussion, and then we can deal with it in that area. Okay. So this is a template that I use for all my knowledge area practices. This is an explanation of the metadata one, and you can see I've added the location comes into RACI, the where people are, the different people in organization, the technology has to deal with these areas, the metrics need to deal with these measurement quantities. This is the oversight on governance. So taking that whole breakdown from a metadata practice template, I can then build the metadata definition or the metadata practice. Okay. So once I've got that, I then, sorry, I jumped too quickly. This would be my next step, is to say, let's focus on decisions, roles, cost, value, and change. Okay. So those are where I start to focus on, and I start to break it down. And my first one is on the types of decisions, and I really like McKinsey's job that they did on categorizing decisions. It's helpful for me to, what's my big bet decisions? These are metadata strategy decisions. Okay, those are the big bet ones that are gonna be long lasting, and so they unfamiliar and infrequent in that scenario. And then we have cross-cutting decisions, which are familiar and frequent. They're your tactical decisions. We then have these ad hoc, can be a combination of strategic and tactical. And then we've got operational decisions. Now, I want to delegate as much as possible, but I need to be clear in what we can delegate and what's important to delegate. And when I put these practices definitions together, I like to have a model of all of my decisions that I'm making to support this practice. And then we can do, of course, we need the decision mandates. And then when we hand over these responsibilities, or we hand over our expectations, we're hoping that they become responsibilities. And people are measured and people are held accountable for those responsibilities. Now, this is just something I use to show them across all of my different knowledge areas where we're sitting and who is involved. So top team, CDO, CIO, CTO, business unit heads, coordinating data stewards and data stewards. Okay. So this is some examples of those decisions. So strategic decisions, they tend to be the strategy, the operating model, reference architecture, assurance, knowledge management. Tactical are my policies, maturity progression. So they are familiar. Where am I going to get to in the next month, the next year? What's at my scorecard and what's on the change level? Operational is your book of work, your project management stuff, okay? Your resourcing, my ownership. And so if I'm delegating a lot of this down to a department level, they are responsible for the resources, the ownership, the stewardship, and it's by project. And then I've got life cycle decisions that happen by creation of a metadata artifact. That's at an operational level. So if we ask people as BAU to put together a set of business glossaries, then we need to know what decisions they can make. Okay, so a RACI matrix, I was sharing with that. This one was quite a surprise to me, and I can share with you. This is almost a template that we've put together from a breaking down the RACIs of metadata. I really like to have the different phases, the metadata lifecycle, the metadata grouping, and then the metadata activities. Now, you see that that's a small extract, but it looks something like this, and it works out, it can get quite large, and we can see all the people that were involved. Can you see all the different areas consulted, involved? So this was, it actually surprised me tremendously as to how many people were involved in the different levels of metadata management. I wanted to just show you the operational metadata. And then when you're doing metadata, then you've got metadata by knowledge area, okay? And then you've got the different types of metadata. So I'm sure you that's giving you an idea of how complex that metadata, the metadata breakdown can be. And what this is metadata change. So the important thing is understanding our stakeholders in terms of where they are, who are influentials. If you've done any change management, you'll be aware of this. How do we then manage the stakeholders? And the management process is to move our influential opponents either into influential supporters or weak opponents, okay? And move our weak supporters into influential supporters. That's what we're trying to do here. This is our stakeholder management process from a change point of view, engagement plans, activities, training plans, and then where do we focus our people in terms of the culture change? Where are our culture change focus areas? And maybe just to give you some highlight on that from a change point of view, that would be that area. How do we handle metadata interns, by persona, metadata professionals, metadata specialists, and we work across these different areas. Okay, so once you've gone through a lot of this, you're sort of trying to land up with a dashboard like this that says, why is this work happening? Linking to my strategic themes in my strategy, semantic layers, departmental landscapes, practice assurance, support data strategy. That's the why as part of metadata. What work is happening, who is happening, where is the work happening, when is the work happening, and how is the work happening. So you, from a manager's point of view, you can explain what is all going on and where are you with this specific responsibility of operationalizing metadata within the department. All right, so that sort of brings me to the end of the discussion on metadata for data managers. Are there any questions, comments? Everyone was very quiet. Paul hardly argued. Did I confuse everybody?
There is a comment from Esty.
Ah.
Of course, there's from SD.
But is it a question? So it's saying, and when you have the practice established, to have a process that integrates with the working team processes, right, and make it part of
Yeah,
the
like
everyday work. Is that the day in the life? Is that?
yeah, almost like then as soon as like it needs to be part of the everyday. So I'm working somewhere now where on the project, they have all these fancy data management tools, but people aren't sure when to use it.
Yes, yes.
And that I'm seeing like that type of process to like kind of to literally say, do this step at that point in your
Yeah.
process.
So,
It's very important.
Esty, have you seen that change that talks about a day in the life?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Okay,
If
so
you covered it now, I joined late.
no, I didn't cover it. I wanted to just, I got to look for it. Sorry, but what change managers do is they walk along with you and understand in a typical day, what is it that you do, when do you do it, and how do you do it? And then when you bring new people on, to Zelda's point, they would say, okay, for this type of role, this is your daily life that you're going to operate
Yeah.
in. So you'd have to update the business glossary when this happens, and then you do this. Is that sort of what you thinking about?
I think this would almost work even better than that. A day in the life of, that's actually a really good idea. I'm gonna suggest that. Because I've set up processes now for like our team, but I mean we're 10 people.
Yes.
So where a day in the life of could be very valuable kind
Yeah.
of for the entire project and
It's
for
a
the entire
fascinating.
company
Yeah.
available. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just trying to share. Oh, I can't find a nice diagram, but here it is. Sorry, I'm not finding it. It's one of Christine. So she taught me about this process of documenting a day in your life. And I find that really helpful from a data management point of view. As a manager, or you're constantly communicating your expectations. This is what I'm expecting you to do, and helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be very cool.
So helpful from just a knowledge management, awareness, what is it that we do, how do we run? Benzi?
Afternoon, everyone. So for me, metadata management is quite new. And thanks for sharing on this session. But I'm just wondering on where would you begin? Because it looks like technical metadata might be the easiest one to start with. But what's actually the best approach to start with the process? Yeah.
Yeah, good. So that is a good question. And let's give you some examples. And a lot of times it depends what the problems are. And I think Liana actually mentioned that in terms of what are the requirements. What requirements does business have around this situation? And so if you remember that diagram on the life cycle of metadata, and hopefully I can find it. I think it was in Essential Concepts. Sorry. So let me get back to Essential Concepts. So if we go to Essential Concepts and we go through these things, here, if we talk about the life cycle of data, plan, design, create, store, use, enhance, plan, design, and then finally dispose. Now, the planning is where lots of your business metadata comes out. So typically you'd want to start with your business metadata that defines why do I need this data, and then you'd have a database designer or a data modeler that will tell you the size of the data and the length of the data. So it would be helpful to have your business metadata, but let's say you're going to take over an existing system. A lot of the times you're just left with a technical definition or the schemas within the database, and now you need to work out what the business metadata is. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. So you may have these physical data, and now you've got to map back up to your business metadata and make it meaningful at a business level.
Yes.
So depends on where you've been told to start, what the requirements are, and then you'll work it out.
Okay, thanks. I think I understand what you're saying. Because in principle, one will think that it will be easier, to start defining the business metadata and
Yes.
drill it down to a technical level. But sometimes you just exposed to the physical layer,
Yes.
of which sometimes you get so stuck in the physical layer that to almost work it up, it becomes just as complicated. So.
Right, and that's why those people were taking 3 months to understand the data. All they got is the data set. And it's a case of, what does it mean? What is the business definition of this? And that's why the people were saying, and they had lots of mistakes where people drew the graphs incorrectly. They went back and then presented, and someone said, no, but that's not what that data is. That's not the grain of the data. So you're making incorrect assumptions.
Yeah, true. Okay, thank you.
Cornelia, I see is that an interesting acronym? DILO, is that day in the life of? Or did you make it up?
No, that's I'm not sure if it's an approved acronym, but that's what we've used in ERP implementations. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. Thanks, Cornelia. Thanks for sharing that. I hadn't seen many people use that day in the life of, but I'm really, once I saw it, it's like, this could solve a lot of my problems.
Pleasure.
Thank you. It's good to see that I'm not just making up terms. Thanks for your feedback. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah, there was a comment from Connie in terms of it feels like it could easily fill a week's course. And it is. It does take, when you get down to the level, that RACI diagram, Connie, I must admit, I so underestimated that one. It was quite embarrassing. I thought it would be quick. Couple of days and I'd have it out, and 3-4 weeks later, and we were still trying to get it. And it just took me almost 3 or 4 days after making a mess. It took me 3 or 4 days to get the RACI diagram designed, so that I could plot all these different people and where it was going. But if we think of metadata, because it's all over the place, and so many people are producing these different artifacts, then you get into, and then having the RACI definition is quite something. Okay. Paul.
Howard, thanks so much. It was excellent. Again, Howard, thanks so much for all the effort and the preparation. Loads of great information.
Okay.
And really looking forward to how this progresses through the different personas. It's gonna be awesome.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much. It's awesome. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Cheers, everybody.